Well, welcome everybody, and welcome to the FORJ conference. This is kind of fun, huh? A room full of people who are interested in rural journalism. That's my kind of place. Um, my name's Torsten, and I'm a photojournalist and filmmaker. I now teach at the University of Oregon. We have a former student here who will attest to that, and I want to talk today about kind of how we do our work. And this is relevant to rural journalism because I think rural journalism is often, rural areas of this country and elsewhere are often not well covered. And some of that is increasingly a lack of good, small, local journalism to cover the communities. There used to be a paper in almost every little town. And now there's lots and lots of towns that don't have. Uh-oh. You should have seen, Brian isn't here anymore, but I came in here thinking, I probably ought to check the tech out. And Lily saved us with an adapter. And then as soon as we got the pictures up, we got a message. The bulb has 10 minutes of life left in it. So if you saw Brian here on his ladder, that's what he was doing. He was fixing the bulb. So we all had a little excitement this morning. But there's a lot of issues. One is the changes in journalism, and a lot of small rural communities no longer have the kind of coverage that they used to. And I think you've probably all read the reports on what that means as far as civic engagement, and communities' bond prices tend to go down, their interest rates go. I mean, it costs more for those communities to borrow money to run their own, all of that. The other problem is that has left the center of journalism in urban areas. And those of you who live in rural America, this will not be a surprise to you. There's a lot of misconceptions about rural America in urban America. And in general, those of us who are from and live in rural areas know more about urban America than urban America knows about rural America. For one thing, they think rural America is one thing, and it is not. Right? Here's an example. I called some folks in Condon and in Dufur recently to work on some things between the university and those communities as far as rural journalism goes. And I've been doing this a long time, but I made this mistake. I assumed I was calling to offer help. To say, what can we do as a university? We have students who are eager to do work. Do you need reporters? What can we do? Yeah, that's right. But the response I got in both places was not that. They said, we would love you to come out here. We would love your students to come out here. And in both cases, it was in part because these are emerging journalists, and we would like them to know more about rural America. And a woman named Kaylin in Condon said, for example, every journalist who comes here from the bigger outlets think that the story is dying towns in rural America. She said, Condon doesn't have that problem. She said, Condon's problem is that so many people are moving back now that you can have businesses going on, that you don't have to be in an urban area, that we don't have a school big enough. We don't have infrastructure. We don't have enough housing. We need a health clinic in town. That's the story about Condon that we need to tell. And that was a surprise to me. And in Dufur, what I heard was that the man named Robert, who I talked to, who said, the last journalist who came out here, it was from the newspaper in Portland, the Oregonian, where I used to work, said, came out here and did a story about how we were wasting water, how rural America is just wasting water right and left. And immediately I thought of the what do you call them? The big computer server farms, right? Who have to be near the river to cool them down. And I thought, well, who are they serving? Is that rural America or is that urban America? How about the dams generating electricity? Is that water being used for urban America? But he said, for him, it was a story about this water. And the big picture was a picture of a bright green wheat field above the Columbia River. And the caption referred, I've tried to find this and I can't find it, but he said the caption referred to how the amount of water it took to get that wheat to grow was wasteful. Well, anyone who knows that area knows that none of the wheat grown along the Columbia Gorge is irrigated. It's all dryland farming. So that's a pretty basic mistake that if we make that as journalists, we lose all credibility. Everything else in that story could have been right, but that one fact blows our credibility. And NPR does this constantly. I'm not here to pick apart urban journalism, but I'm just saying there's things you have to get right. They never, no, I shouldn't say never. Too often they make the mistake of mixing up, when they talk about firearms, caliber versus gauge. If you grew up in a place where you hunted, you know the difference between caliber and gauge. And if you're going to be a reporter in those communities and talk about those issues, you need to get that straight. Because otherwise, everything else, if you don't get that right, people think, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And how do you do that? That's the question. That's what I want to talk about today. So here's how I've organized this. I want to talk about just some basic principles, and I want to, when I first started, when they asked me to do this, I thought, oh, I'm a professor. I'm not really a professor. I don't have a PhD. I came in through the side door into academia because I've taken so many pictures that they had to figure out something to do with me. So they made me a professor. And I thought, oh, I should talk about big concepts. But I'm a storyteller. So I have a bunch of stories to show you. And I want to talk to you about some of the lessons learned from them. And I'm going to blow the punchline for you. The lesson is you go in and you listen first. Too many of us as journalists come in and we come to a community, we come to a part of the country, a part of the world. Those of you who have worked abroad know that it's very easy to go to some other place and say, well, here's the story about this place, right? We're going to go to Pakistan. What's the story? Oh, it's a rough place, right? It's full. That's not what I found when I went to Pakistan. What I found was families living on farms that resembled much of rural America. That's what I found. But that's not what I expected, right? I expected as a formerly blonde, now gray-haired, blue-eyed guy that I would be rejected. That's not, they wanted to know about my kids. They wanted to know what kind of farm I grew up on. They wanted to know all that. So you have to listen first. So I thought I'd start with a picture of me listening to the authorities in a small place in Alaska called Akiak. And I've made a series of films up there, and it is a community that is trying to regenerate language, culture, things that were destroyed by colonialism, first by the Russians and then by the Americans. They're very different colonial methodologies, but both resulted in destruction of vast amounts of knowledge, and not to mention stuff and a lot of dead people. But so we're doing film. I was doing a film about this community that was trying to bring a diaspora of Sukpit people back, especially kids, and teach language and all of that. I don't know anything about that. So the first thing I had to do was listen, and sometimes the authorities aren't the people you think they are. This is just Mr. Peterson here is telling me what I should be photographing. And he was right, mostly. And I'll tell you about, I don't want this to be a litany of mistakes, but I'll tell you some of the times when I've had surprises and how I used them. So this is Betty Cooper, who's an elder on the Blackfeet Reservation. In the last 25 years, I've done a lot of work in indigenous communities, especially in the West and in Alaska. And I'm an immigrant from Sweden. So I'm not only not indigenous to North America, I don't really belong here, right? Like I got dropped here by my parents when I was, this high. And I'll show you some of that later. But so some students and I was doing a film on the Blackfeet Reservation, but I had some students with me, and we were doing a story that was kind of in response to the Curtis pictures, if you know what they are, the Edward Curtis pictures, who has this very strange legacy in Native communities. Almost everybody has some Curtis pictures in their home. And this is Betty's great-grandmother, who was photographed by Ed Curtis. But we did a project where instead of coming in and saying this is what an Indian looks like, we thought we'd come in and say, how do you want to be remembered in 100 years? And Betty said, oh, I got it. So she's part of the stand-up headdress society on the Blackfeet Reservation. This is how she wanted to be dressed, and she wanted to hold the picture of her great-grandmother. And that was kind of fun, right? Like exactly why we shot straight into a window, I can't remember. That was a bit of a mistake. But we made this picture, and we thought, well, that's cool. Betty, it's been nice to talk to you. We're going to move along. She said, oh, we're not done. I have another picture I want to make. And we said, what's that? So she left the room, and she came back wearing this, and she said, I'd like a picture with my other grandmother. Oh, this is her grandmother, not her great-grandmother, on the other side of the family. And I said, well, tell me about her. She goes, well, she was a German immigrant who landed in Iowa somehow, got tired of Iowa, made her way across, and the Blackfeet Reservation fell in love with Betty's grandfather. And she said, so I'd like a picture of that grandmother too. And we talked about that a little bit, and she said, I'm an elder of the Blackfeet Nation, I'm indigenous, but let's not forget that you can be more than one thing. I don't have to be that. I can be that and the granddaughter of a German immigrant to this country. Those are not opposed. They can, and so if you're going to do a story about Betty, you could shoehorn her into this one identity she has that fits into what my head was. But she reminded me that people are more complex than that, right? So this is one of, a student of mine took this picture. This is Judge Hall, who's a rancher on the Blackfeet Reservation. He and I became buddies. I don't know why. Just, we hit it off. And we were doing a film there about a flood that had happened, that had affected, and I actually, his sister and one of their best friends were kind of the main characters in the film. So he wasn't really a big part of the film. But this is what Judge looks like when we went in to, get this, on the Blackfeet Reservation, they call them Indian Days. Like we wouldn't do that in Eugene. We're too politically correct to call it Indian Days. But on the reservation, on the nation, they call it Indian Days. So that's what you call it. And this is how he got dressed up to do that. So I told him about this project, and he goes, oh yeah, come by my house. And we set a time in the afternoon, and we walked into his house, and his living room was waist deep in regalia. It was just piles. And Judge has made, he's a rancher, but he's made some extra money being in films. He was in Dances with Wolves, and he's been in all these films, right? He makes a lot of fun of that, but it makes him pretty good money. And so we show up, and he is fully done up, like full regalia, face paint, the whole thing. And he has a beautiful window that has light lit in. He goes, I know what picture I want you to take. And he says, I'm going to be stoic. And he did like this. So I made that picture of Judge. And I'm thinking, we're not really busting any stereotypes here, are we? And then his niece was there, Cheyenne, and this is me teaching her how to use, this is a nephew, but that's Cheyenne. I'm teaching her how to use a camera. And she made that picture. And I use this in my classes to explain that portraiture is really a record of the relationship between the photographer and the person being photographed. And the reason these are two different pictures is because we have different relationships with Judge. Like, he called himself the Stoic Indian. He doesn't need to be that for Cheyenne. But for whatever reason, he felt he had to be that with me. So we did this, and then he says, now I want to go up on the hill behind the place here, and I want to make some pictures there. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, let's get away from the Curtis way of doing photography. We did not succeed. And Cheyenne did. That's not a Curtis picture, but I made pretty much the same dang picture that people have been making for a couple hundred years, right? So I thought, okay, or this one, Yeah. So we're heading up the hill. He brought a horse or a couple horses and all his nieces and nephews who were very excited because I had handed out cameras for them to use. And I always hand out cameras that I can afford to have dropped. And then they didn't, but so we head up, and I'm making this kind of picture, and this kind of picture, and I'm showing it to him, and he says, Professor. He called me Torsten when we were just out, when he had like a lesson to give me. Like when he was irritated with me, he called me Professor. So he said, Professor, you are not understanding what we need to do here. And I said, what are we needing to do? He said, we need to make pictures that show who I am when I'm up here. I said, okay. So he literally directed me. He said, I want you to kneel down in front of my horse, shoot up at me so I look big and powerful. You just stay down there. And we did, and we just waited. And then he said, we're waiting for good light. This is a guy who's worked in films. He understands this stuff. So, boom, we make this. And I say to him, I showed it to him, he goes, that's it. That's the picture I want. And this picture is now about this size in a bar in the south end of the nation. And every time I go in there, I say, hey, I took that picture of Judge. And they say, free beer. So it's great. But I said to him, now, Judge, we are making the same pictures. Like we are making pictures of, and he said, yep. And I said, don't you think we ought to make some? And he said, Professor, did you just come to the Blackfeet Nation to tell me what an Indian looks like? I said, no. and we talked about this later because we then went and had beers at the bar where this now hangs. And he said, just because that imagery has been abused doesn't mean that I can't own it. Like this is who, and certain times in his life, this is who he is, and he wants that recorded. So it was a matter of me opening up past that. Like I was so hell-bent on beating the stereotype that I couldn't see that he was trying to own it back. Does that make sense? Like and I think about him often when I go to any community. It's like, well, you can't not have a bias. You cannot not have a prejudice when you go in and work as a journalist of any kind. So I don't think the goal is to clear your mind from that. It's to be willing to look past what that is. And in fact, I would say that a bias could also be called a point of view, and it's what makes you valuable as a journalist. It's why if all of us went with cameras to photograph something that's happening here in Bend tomorrow, what's happening in Bend tomorrow? Track meet. Let's say there's a track meet tomorrow. We're all going to photograph a track meet. We would all come back with different pictures. And that's because we're different human beings that would bring different lived experiences to it. And that's a strength, not a weakness. But it can become a problem when the lived experiences we have predetermined make us blind to seeing something that's really there, right? Like I live in Eugene, Oregon. I try to be a good liberal human being who's open to people of all backgrounds and all of that, and I don't want to be in stereotypes. And that, I think, is good, generally, but it made me blind to what Judge wanted to see until because we were friends, and he's a brave guy, he was kind enough to say, you got this wrong. Like, pay attention. Now, he did also make this picture of his nephew. And I grew up around horses, and if I had ever laid down on a horse with my head on its butt, my grandmother would have whipped me. But here, he's comfortable on a horse, right? And I like this picture, and I showed this picture to him, and he said, no, I want you to photograph my eyes. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, what's my nickname? His nickname was Froggy. And I said, well, why do you have that nickname? He goes, I'm the only guy on the Blackfeet Nation with green eyes. Oh. That's what he wanted photographed. Like that's cool. This is fun and cool, but that's the picture he wanted. And Cheyenne, the young woman who took that other picture, when I asked her, she said, I want you to make a picture that shows everybody that I'm the fastest bareback horseback rider on the Blackfeet Nation. And she said, don't you tell him I'm the fastest girl. I'm the fastest rider. So we made this picture. And again, there are possibilities if you can open yourself up to that. So, and then Cheyenne's grandfather, when I asked him, I said, what are you proud of? What do you want people to know about you? He said, I want people to know I was a good grandfather. So that was a matter of just hanging out until he was being a good grandfather. And being comfortable, having people be comfortable enough with you so they actually let you into their living room and trust you to do that. Because you can cause a lot of damage to people with this is media agnostic. This, if you're doing audio, writing, video, illustration, photography, storytelling is super powerful. So that's why I think this matters. And this is what we don't do often enough, especially when we work for big media outlets. We have an assignment to go somewhere, and we're going to go to Condon, and we're going to cover how hard it is to age well in a rural community. And we're going to find the person who we can tell that story about, and we might walk past 9 other stories that are more important to understanding that community on our way to that assignment. And that's a negotiation, right? And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go in and have a sense of what's important. You should. That's what journalists do. And it may not be the same as people in the community, and that may also be legitimate, because you do have a perspective as an outsider. It's easy to put things in a broader context, but it's always a balance between those things, right? If you go into Condon and you tell a story about how shitty it is to grow old there, and you don't also tell the story about how many young people are moving there and how they're trying to get a new clinic and all that, you might be missing something. It's not that you're telling untruths, it's just that you're finding maybe not enough of the truth or the wrong truth. Does that make sense? You can interrupt me anytime you want. So when I'm in Alaska, that's me. That's Roy, who that's for bears, not for journalists. And it's a lot of this. It's just getting to know people. It's the luxury of time, which is the other, that most of the sins we commit as journalists is because we're always on such tight time deadlines. We're in a hurry. And I don't know, sometimes there's no way around that, but if you're on super short time, maybe the ambition shouldn't be this, it should be this. And then you fight with editors to be able to go back and develop stories over time. I show people pictures as I'm working. I'm not uncomfortable doing that. I don't let people edit my pictures. I don't let people tell me what should be published, but I do want to know what their reaction is. And in fact, I'm going to skip down to a picture down here. This is Mama Gert in the Boot Heel of Missouri, the northern tip of the Mississippi Delta, and this is one of her nieces, whose name I can't remember, I'm embarrassed. But I took this picture, and I was trying to be very respectful, and I thought, they're poor, they're farmers. This is a 30-year project that I'm just wrapping up now on black farmers in the Mississippi Delta area. And I was a little worried that she would be embarrassed about this. She was not embarrassed. She's in a wheelchair. She runs this farm from a wheelchair. And when I showed her this picture, she said, well, that's my favorite picture. I said, it is. Why is that? She said, because this is how we teach girls to become women. Now, do you think I saw that when I took the picture? Like, that was not anywhere near. But that changes how I'm using this picture. I'm putting together a book right now. This picture will be different. So there is value in kind of having a circular motion. Tom.
One thing I've always loved about your photography, Torsten, is you go beyond the aesthetic to find true intimacy. It's a very intimate photo. I would love to know any tricks that you have to authentically get to such an intimate moment, even on deadline.
It's harder on deadline. Much harder on deadline. This is my project. This is why it took 30 years. Because it's my project. This is my master's project. I just kept going. 19, is that what it says? Actually, it was taken before that. That's probably when it was. This is probably when it was digitized, because this is all shot on film. This was more like 92 or 93. Well, for one thing, you're not seeing the pictures when I failed at that. The trick to being thought of as a good photographer is to take millions of pictures and show the 3 that are any good, and not show those other, and that's true of all media, right? But I think it's all on the same thing. If you stop and listen to people, once I got to know, this is the Richardson family. Once I got to know the Richardson family, and they caught me, I was a student. I was sleeping in my car while I was working on this, and they would not. After that, I always slept at their house, and so I slept at their house. And I had time, and this, it is a story about black farmers, but we didn't run around talking about how they were black and I was white very often. That was not like it was about family. Where are you from? Mama Gert's husband, Mr. Will, wanted to know what farming was like in my part of Sweden. What was farming like in Minnesota, and all of that. Like those became, once the conversations go beyond that, then and I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old when I made this picture, and they wanted to know about that. Are you going to bring your kids? I'm like, no, it's really hard to do my job with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old around. But so it sounds like a non-answer, but I think it comes back to time and a willingness to let people be who they are. She is not just a black woman who runs a farm in the Mississippi Delta. That is what she does. But she's also a grandmother and someone who's dealing with a disability, and a heck of a cook. Like, the reason I've been doing this project for 30 years, I can go back. Mama Gert's not with us anymore, but is so I can keep going back and eat that food. Like, it's terrible for you, but boy, is it good. Some of the food down there. So what I'd like, I'm going to pause here. There's 2 other things I want to do. I can't remember how long this goes. 9. Does anyone know? I should know this. 9:55. That's very precise. Okay. I'll pause, and any other questions? That was a good question, Tom. And the answer is on deadline. The shorter the deadline, the less likely this is to happen. It's very unlikely that you walk into someone's house and make this picture 10 minutes later. Yeah. I might be making some of it up. I don't think so. But, 30 years is a long time to keep things, like our memories are intact. But that is what she told me. That's what she liked. Yes?
How do you reach out initially to start this whole thing?
It depends on the community. In this case, I reached out through Lincoln University Extension. And extension in this state, and most states, is amazing if you're trying to reach out into rural communities. They are trusted. University of Oregon is not trusted in rural America. OSU is much more trusted. I don't know how this community college is trusted in Oregon. I haven't had experience with that. But if you come after a phone call, or better yet, in this case, a woman named Alma Owen took an interest, and she threw me into her dad's Lincoln town car, and we drove down to the boot. It's about a 5-hour drive. She just introduced me to people. That doesn't work if you got a daily deadline. So calling ahead of time, finding someone who thinks that what you're doing has integrity or value of some kind, and then being introduced by somebody. It's pretty rare. On daily assignments for newspapers, I would often knock on doors, but very rare that I'd show up without a phone call first. On this kind of story. Newsy stuff is different. But if you can get someone to open doors for you in a community, someone who's trusted. Pastors, I stayed a couple times. Churches had little guest rooms, and I would stay at their churches, and then I'd be invited to a Sunday service, and they'd introduce me. And I always brought pictures. This was back in the days of film and prints. The next time I came down, I'd bring prints back, and it's kind of fun. You'd see those pictures pinned up through the church and stuff. But I think that's it. There is, journalists are not universally trusted in this country. You all know that, right? Like, anyone who's knocked on the door knows that. Or gotten an earful about the last journalist who came by and abused the community somehow. You have to live with that legacy, too. So I'm going to show you some pictures from my home community in Sweden as well, and not just because I like it, but because there's a lesson in there as well. But let me go to a story. Tom, you've probably seen this. When I lived and worked at a little paper in southern Indiana called the Herald, it's still the best paper I've ever worked for. This paper served its community to an extraordinary degree. And we were a 6-day-a-week paper. Every Saturday they had what they called the Saturday feature. And it was a photo and word story. This is with a staff of 2 photographers and 4 writers. We cranked one of these out every week. And it started on the front page, and it would run as many pages as it needed to, without ads, on the front of the paper. And that is a really stupid business decision. It is an amazing decision if you want to be trusted in the community. Because when I knocked on some, and they'd been doing it for 25 years before I showed up. I didn't invent anything here. I just stepped into a beautiful kind of legacy. But when I called somebody or knocked on a door and said, hey, I'm here because I hear that you went through the school system and you went away to school and now you come back as a school teacher in your home community. Could I spend the first week of you teaching in school where you went to elementary school? Could I spend that week with you and go home with you? People are like, oh, is that one of those Saturday features? Like there was a trust built there. But a writer and I ran across Carl and Irvin Colley at a cafe. We were working on another story. We just met them. We got chatting with them. And they live in the house that they were both born in. And they're 2 of 7 siblings. The only 2 who are still alive. And when we did this, he was 87 and he was 78. And we pitched the story. Now, this is for those of you who are editors out there. If someone comes and pitches a story, hey, there's these 2 guys who live together and farm, most editors would say, who gives a shit? Yeah. Right? Like, what's the hook? What's the story? And our answer was, we don't know. But there's something there. And this editor trusted us enough to let us just spend time with Carl and Irvin. And it was pretty, like now, as an older journalist, I could finagle this. I could say, look, we're aging in rural America, healthcare. Their neighbors they're farmers, but they don't generate enough food for themselves, so neighbors bring food by. It's about community. It's about a passing of an era and all of that, right? I could write that pitch now. When I was a young guy, I couldn't write that pitch. I said, I don't know. They just seem interesting to me. But the editor trusted us. So and we get to know them, and they trusted us to an unhealthy degree. Like they were more trusting than they should have been. We hadn't earned it, but we didn't, I don't think we violated that trust. And this is the picture that kind of holds down the whole story. And there's a quote here. The pictures are pretty limited. Like part of what makes them strong is that they're so visceral and so present tense, right? There's no past, there's no future, there's just the present tense in photography. And so you have to add words, add context. And the words that are most important here are, he said, when we were young, he took care of me. Now that we're old, I'm going to take care of him. That's the nut in this story, is that Irvin was working hard to let his brother age and die, basically, on the farm. That was his goal, was to keep him on the farm that he was born on and raised on. And I think it was Carl who had lived away and worked for the post office a little bit. I'm a little muddled on this. I should have read my own story. But Irvin had never lived anywhere else. So they were on this farm in southern Indiana, just north of the Kentucky border, 10 or 12 miles, something like that. And this was one of these listening moments. So first of all, I was young enough to sit backwards in a pickup truck and take this picture. I could not make this picture. Although now they got these flip screens, I could probably swing it. Technology, autofocus is saving me because I do not see like I used to. But every day they would take a drive around their gravel roads and they would say things like, And I say this because it's easy to think of people like this as unworldly, that they don't know much about the world, right? They're insular and all of that. But we'd drive around and they'd say, oh, do you remember when the Gelhausens got flooded out? And I'd say, no. When was that? 57. And then they'd say, do you remember when that the Schmidts had a cow that had 3 calves all at once? I'd say, no, when was that? Oh, that was 72. And they knew their world quite well. They just didn't know. I had to show them on a map where Sweden was. But we are wrong when we think that we are the holders of knowledge and the people we visit are not holders of knowledge. They may just be different kinds of knowledge, right? And we have to rid ourselves of that hierarchy. Because otherwise, we make stories about people like Carl and Irvin as if they were stupid. And that's kind of unforgivable. Because we come into these relationships with a great deal of power. The power to publish. But they were trusting me completely. And, I slept in their house as well. And Carl and Irvin sleep in the same bed. Because they always had. When Irvin was born, their parents already had 6 kids to deal with. So they put him in Carl's bed and said, take care of this kid. And he still was. Now, I took pictures of that. We did not publish those pictures because we thought our community would not have gotten past those pictures. I don't know if we were right about that or not, but that's the judgment we made. And that was us making sure that our judgments were true to who they were, but you don't have to reveal everything. Irvin worked hard. He was a tired 78-year-old. And any of you who've done farm work knows that it's never ending and it makes you hurt. He was and still milked cows by hand. I made the mistake. He said, what am I going to do if I get sick? Who's going to milk my cows? Because nobody knows how to milk by hand anymore. I made the mistake of saying, oh, I know how to milk cows by hand. And he goes, oh, I'm calling you. I'm like, oh, God, I'm not sure I got time to go come milk your cows twice a day. But, and it took a toll on Irvin. And this is the kind of thing with time. You don't make this picture the first day you're there. You're there because you get to spend time. And that's a conversation between you and your editor. You can't ask for it all the time. Like, that's unreasonable. Especially if you're doing something stupid like trying to put out a paper every day, or even once a week. It's just a dumb idea. But and this is where we met them originally. Why is this picture here? It's not a great picture, right? Like aesthetically, there isn't that much. Why is this picture here? Why is it important to this story? What does it bring up? A huge issue. Time, age, right? Like, this kid highlights an almost childlike thing here, right? You have to be careful. Now, this is a very interpretive picture. You have to be careful with this kind of journalism because you can also, I'm a good photographer. I can make anyone in this room look like a horse's ass. Easy peasy, right? So you have to be careful that you don't use. And I was just sitting on the back of the pickup, and I'm a trained documentary photographer. I'm waiting for a moment. It's one of the key elements in photojournalism is moments. And I'm waiting for one of them to reach over and touch the other one, or for them to look at each other and laugh, or something. And it is not happening. I'm just sitting on the hood of the pickup. I'm ready. Nothing happened. Finally, I don't know, 8 hours later. It was probably 3 minutes. I don't know. But I said, are you guys going to say anything? And without turning around, Irvin says, we pretty much said everything. And I thought, okay, that's the picture. That's the picture, is 2 men who know each other so well, 2 brothers who know each other so well that they can sit on the back of a pickup truck and they don't have to fill the space with noise. They can just sit there. And so then the only moment I could find was a chicken in the right place, They are, yeah. And then one day we get a call, and from one of their relatives, a cousin or second cousin, who said, Carl's in the hospital. Now, we had published one story already about them up to this point. And the community loved this story. They loved this story. So we hear he's in the hospital. So try this these days. I walked into that hospital with a full bag of cameras and started photographing. And everybody in that hospital knew who I was. I was the guy who'd made those pictures of Carl and Irvin. So they let me do this, completely blowing all the rules. Any of you work in a hospital? Well, just try this as an experiment sometime. Walk into the closest hospital with a camera and start photographing patients on beds. Just try it. It's really cool what happens when you do that. But this is the small community, and you build that trust. And they had already seen this. But Irvin had fallen and broken a hip. Now, any of you know broken hips are a bad thing. And the older you are, the worse it is. And so I visited with Irvin. So now remember what his goal in life was to keep Carl on the farm. No longer works. Carl's now in a home, being taken care of. And Carl's decline was precipitous. So this was the first visit where Carl did not recognize his brother. This is not a good picture. Let's just, aesthetically, this is a moment. Without that caption, this picture doesn't mean anything. But it has to be. This was a failure of a photographer. If you see that photographer, please tell him to straighten things out and get better. Because there probably was a picture made that would have been better. But this is what we had. But it's a super important storytelling moment. So really, this was a caption. This is a picture that's here so we can write that caption, right? Because it's an important moment. Oh, this is a picture of me and my dad back in Sweden when I was a little guy. I'm wearing clogs, which I always wore. What? This is in southern Sweden. I have some nuns. But let me show you I'll show these quickly from my home community. And I'm not doing it just to show off my home community. I'm doing it because I have a point to make. And so far, I've talked a little bit about going into communities that I'm not a member of. And how do you find ability to tell stories with authenticity in those, right? And I think we should be doing that. I do not want to live in the world where the only people whose stories I can tell are 64-year-old bearded white guys who immigrated from Sweden. That's a little narrow world for me to operate in. I want to be able to use my storytelling, both for personal reasons. I mean, let's be honest, it's really cool to be a storyteller because you get to go and look at the world, and it's a marvelous place. It's the great gift of being a journalistic storyteller, is we knock on people's doors, and if you have a camera hanging around your neck, you can say, can I just look at you for a while? Whereas if you didn't have a camera around your neck, they're calling 911, right? There's this guy at the front door who wants to come in and just look at me. But right, I mean, it is an entree. If you do it right, what you're doing is you're validating who people are by saying that you are important enough for me to spend my time and my experience and my skills. And I think your story is worth my time. I want to tell your story because the world will be a better place if we tell this story. And at some point, like with the murdered and missing Indigenous women, there are boundaries to that, what you can do. But I don't want those boundaries to be small. So that's why I showed you some of the work I've done in Indigenous communities, and then Carl and Irvin, who lived in a whole different world than I did, right? But it's also true in our home communities. We also have to have the same listening there, because even there we inhabit a space that may not be inclusive of everybody in the community. There are stories in our home communities, and I'll use my home community as an example. So this is one of my grandmother's houses. This farm has two houses. This is the new one. It was built in 1724. And that's my wife and my daughter. And I spent much of my childhood on this farm. And it's right in the middle of Sweden. And Sweden industrialized late and very quickly after World War II, during and after World War II. this place was left behind. We didn't have paved roads to this. It's a community of 100. So, and I'm related to everybody. But we didn't have paved roads. We were among the last in Scandinavia to get phones and all that. There are some places up north that got them a little later. But people have called it the Appalachia of Sweden, which I don't know if it's, I don't know who we're making fun of there. But like we speak a dialect that, my friend Mika is here from Finland. We came to this area in about 1600 from Finland. They call it Finnmark. And our dialect has old Finnish words that modern Finns don't understand. Because I'm sure we're butchering them after 400 years of using them. But it's a beautiful place. And here it is, the little village. We get a good deal on red paint because it comes out of the iron mines. There's a powder that's antifungal so we're cheap. So we all paint our houses the same. It's a beautiful place. There's my grandmother, who I spent much of my childhood with. So my memories of this place are, there I am. I was a dirty kid and loved working in the field. It was like such a magic place to be a kid. And anywhere I was, when I was hungry, I'd walk in the house and they'd feed me. Anywhere in this village. I mean, I was related to everybody. It was a really remarkable upbringing in that sense. And did not set you up to live in other places that were much less, but there's this sense of light, and there were berries. These are my kids, I grew up cutting wheat and grain by hand because you couldn't get tractors to some of these fields. I mean, it really was like a bygone era. That's my great uncle, who's also a fiddler. There's my son learning how to cut. It was hard work, bend over all day, but it's mostly about family. And really this beautiful, idyllic place, full of music. This guy's a total poser, by the way, because his knickers are not made out of moose hide. This guy's knickers are made out of moose hide. So if you see him, don't trust him. He's just playing along. There's my great uncle, who was he got an award, a gold medal from the King of Sweden for being fiddler of national heritage, or I don't know how you'd translate it. My aunt. So it really was this magic place to grow up. So as I became a photographer, I brought my kids back and I tried to photograph that magic. And it was still there, but it felt empty somehow. And there's folks here who milk moose. Don't try this at home. But if you go to this part of Sweden, you can buy moose milk cheese. He was very nervous about me being there because moose are not domesticated. I mean, this moose will still kick you to death if I used a flash. But this place has changed. With the EU, you can no longer make a living as a farmer here. We cannot, in a northern climate, compete with German and Dutch and Spanish and French farmers in Europe. So the whole farm part of the life, which was the hub, not only economically but culturally, is gone. And the people who are left are old people. So this village that I grew up thinking of as this idyllic child, and my kids did experience some of that, but it had changed. So even in the place that I thought I knew the best on the planet, I had to listen to what was happening there. And this is true for you too, in your home communities. There are things and stories happening in your communities that you don't know about. And I guarantee it, no matter where you're from. And that's not because you all are bad journalists, that you are good journalists, I think. Otherwise, you wouldn't be taking time to come to a conference like this. But it's who we are. We live in parts of our world, even in a community of 100. There are things that I wasn't seeing until my grandmother, we were talking, and she said, well, we don't get together to have dances anymore because we're too old to dance. So we watch TV. We watch Dallas reruns on television. Now, I wish I had that picture, but I don't. And remember this picture of Gustav? This is at his funeral. So these are the gatherings now in the village, tend to be when people are passing. And there's still this sense of beauty, but it has a very different feel. The story of my home community is different. And if I'm going to be a good journalistic storyteller, I have to reflect that. I can bring a sense of kind of the magic that I remember as a kid to it, aesthetically and storytelling and all of that. But if I'm going to be honest, I need to tell these pictures of now the traditional dress is being used more for funerals and less for weddings. That may be sad, or it may just be the way it is, but it is how it is. And there are still some young people around. They tend to come back. This is why the story in Condom was so interesting to me. That young people are moving back to that little town. That's an interesting story to me. And there's still a sense of community. And there's Gustav's grave. And now many of these buildings, like my grandmother's farm, that first picture, that are sitting empty much of the time. And we can lament that if we want. And I do. But as a storyteller, my job is to tell that story. But there are some new families coming back. After the pandemic, we know that you can do work in places that are not physically connected to your workplace. So people are starting to come back. So there may be a new chapter in the story. And I don't know how long I'm going to live, but however long I live, I'm going to continue telling the story. Right? And this is true in all of our communities. They are, when I was at one of the papers, I was in charge of internships. So I'd get this huge stack of internship applications, and I'd go through them. And we had a young guy who had been offered a job at the paper he was currently interning in Maine. We were in southern Indiana. And we said, well, why would you turn down a full-time job to come to be an intern with us? And he said, there aren't any stories left to do in Biddeford, Maine. And my colleague and I looked at each other and said, not this guy, right? Like, there is no place on the planet where there isn't a new story today. I guarantee it. There's always something changing. People are getting older. People are moving away. People are moving in. The wheat crop, you can't make a living growing just wheat. Now you have to figure out how to grow barley because they're brewing beer in the Dow. Or whatever. There's always a new story. And that's our job, is to listen with that. And I have 3 minutes to stop talking. I'm going to stop talking. But that's and that should be encouraging to us, that you're not going to run out of stories. You might run out. As a guy in my 60s, I'm acutely aware that I might run out of time to tell the stories, but I'm not going to run out of stories to tell. Right? Is that glum or is that not? I hope it's hopeful for you, because your communities, whatever they are full of cool stories, and it's a matter of listening. I have 3 minutes for questions. My wife said, don't just leave a few minutes for questions at the end, and here I am.
Where did you settle when you came to the United States? How did that happen? Where did you settle?
We came to Minnesota because that's where Swedes go. And in Nebraska, right? In Kansas, there's Lindsborg, Kansas. And then is it Poulsbo? In Poulsbo in Seattle. Yeah, we got our little ghettos here and there of Swedes. We came because my parents, I was raised by wolves. They are adventurers, and they wanted to paddle the Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota. And my dad was fresh out of a residency in med school in nephrology. And there was the Bethesda Swedish Lutheran Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota, that offered an exchange. So we came. There was going to be a year, and they liked my dad. Dad's still alive. He was a hot. I mean, he was in on the invention of the dialysis machine. And when he got into medicine, everyone with kidney disease just died, and slowly and kind of terribly. And so they kept him a second year, and then that second year he was offered a job at the University of Minnesota. So I don't think they didn't ask me. I was 10 years old, but we hadn't intended to stay. and now they live in Walla Walla, of all places. Yeah. Walla Walla? Yeah, so I have to drive 7 hours to go see my parents. Yeah.
This is lovely.
Thank you.
You use the word trust a lot in terms of what the community needs to, you need to earn from the community, but you didn't use the word respect. And I think that's
Oh.
what you bring into the community, right?
Yeah.
Respect the people that, and the idea that I'm here to learn something.
Yeah.
I'm here to confirm something, I'm here to learn something.
See, you should have been given this talk, not me. Because that's no, that's really no. What you just said was super smart. I think it adds a layer to it. Yeah.
Imbue others with that, right? I'm working with a reporter now on who I hope will do this story about a debate tournament that happens in the Oregon State Penitentiary. It's probably the largest debate tournament that happens inside an incarceration facility in the country.
What a great story.
College teams come and compete, and the reporter who might work for a large national radio outlet who've already slightly but accurately dissed in this presentation. Like, she and her editor, who have to approve the story, they want to know what hook is, right? And it's like, well, there's already those stories about the prisoners who put on Shakespeare plays, and there's one story about like prisoners who debated and beat the Harvard.
This story is self-evident.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you imbue others with the understanding that don't go in for confirmation, go in to learn something?
The short answer is I don't know. And I also spent most of my career avoiding management duties because I don't like being inside buildings very much. This is why I also went from being a writer to a photographer, because you can't do it over the phone. But I do think it has something to do with time. And most of us, given some time with people, will start to see them as human beings, even if they come with labels like inmate or that. And that's always been my plea to editors, is like, give me enough time to really know who these people are. But I don't know that there are people who are hopeless as far as this goes, but people have different amounts of empathy. And some of that's lived experience. I mean, if you have someone in your family who's been incarcerated, you might be more inclined to find a way to see the people in that story as more than the crime that they've been incarcerated for. Does that?
I think it's not so much that, although that is often an issue for many people, and hopefully the story will be told and will help with that.
Right.
It's more the cookie cutter. I want to know what
Right.
I want to know what the story is
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Don't know what the story is about. Don't ask me what the experience of the incarcerated.
No.
Why they want to be on a debate team.
And-
I think you got to go and watch the debate.
And that's one of the incredible tensions in journalism, is that it really is a bad idea to publish a newspaper every day, because you have to know ahead of time what's going to go in there. I mean, that's what budget meetings are about. And it's a disaster, not a disaster, but ask me how I know this. You only have so many times you can come to your editors and say, that thing that was going to go in tomorrow's paper, I need another day. And they're like, well, what are we going to put on Metro Center? I don't know, not my problem. So what I learned was to say, I had a little evergreen book of easy little, the throw-off stories that were not offensive. And I'd say, look, I got this little thing that I can go photograph that we can put on the center of Metro page, and I'll trade you that for another day or two or a week or something. But what you talk about is a tension that, and I think it's getting worse because there's this unending kind of, it's no longer a blob of information once a day, twice a day. It's a 2-foot fire hose of information that we have to throw out into the world. And it's always been a tension that's probably getting worse. I just made you feel worse about life. I'm sorry. But I think it is a team approach at that place. And that's why we need functioning news organizations, because when you're on your own doing this, those are really hard judgment calls. Because then if you're freelancing, you're trying to get paid, right? Like this story was just on my own, but most of these stories I was on staff. So if I asked for a week, I would get paid for that whole week. You know, it was a different world. I'm sorry that I'm not answering what I need to. I wish, if, yeah, yeah. No. I mean, it's always been there, and it's a challenge as someone who's teaching the next generation of journalists, like how to keep that kind of sense. And I love you're bringing up the idea of respect, because I think that's what good listening is. It's yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming.